Welcome to my second presentation in this webinar entitled Bringing Data Together, NICOR's Future. In my first presentation, I concentrated on the role of NICOR in the NCAP program, which has primarily been designed to deliver quality improvement and quality assurance across the national cardiovascular landscape. However, it's become clear in the last few years that the data we're collecting in NICOR has much more value than just a tight quality improvement program, and has huge value for other potential applications, something that we've called extended use of the data, or EUD. In this presentation, I'm going to briefly outline some of these new areas of opportunity, which, if we're able to achieve them, will position NICOR right at the heart of the national cardiovascular landscape, and indeed play a key role in making cardiology lead in some of the developments in national data more broadly. I'm going to talk about new registries, the importance of the whole patient journey and not just disease management, how this links to other diseases such as cancer, renal disease and the like, how we can use these data for disease surveillance and device surveillance in a way that will actually give the public more confidence in the value of their data to them, how we can inform guidelines, and very importantly, how the national data we collect in routine clinical practice can underpin a transformation in cardiovascular research. So the 6 registries that we've been discussing so far in the NCAP program represent the core for cardiovascular disease presentation and treatment. But quite clearly, what has been achieved in integrating these 6 registries into a single platform, that has been a huge achievement for NICOR in the last few years, gives us the opportunity not just to limit ourselves to those 6 registries, but actually to add on other cardiovascular data sets. This gives a big advantage in consolidating the cardiovascular data in one place, but the advantage to the individual data sets that come in is to use the underpinning that they get from the collective program that we have established in NICOR, but also, very importantly, add on value by being able to link their own particular data to cardiovascular outcomes more generally. The new data sets that have come in to NICOR include procedural data sets like the TAVI registry. They include complications that we had not had covered before, the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Rehabilitation should be included in NICOR. And of course, prevention is becoming increasingly important, and starting to include data sets that are relevant to cardiovascular prevention, such as familial hypercholesterolemia, would greatly enhance the integrated cardiovascular platform. Now, traditionally, large data has been used to assess and deliver quality improvement and quality assurance, and that has been the key driver of the NICOR program thus far. But actually, there's a new metric emerging in the healthcare system, which is the metric of delivering not just quality, but also value. Value is easy to define. It is quality divided by the cost taken to provide that care. And Michael Porter from the Harvard Business School said that improving value for patients may be the only thing that all the key stakeholders can agree on in terms of healthcare delivery. So the ability to integrate all the cardiovascular outcomes and measure quality across cardiovascular care gives us the opportunity to link to the increasingly granular data that we have on cost to actually start to provide a value map for the country and not just a care delivery map. And this could transform the way in which the healthcare system actually responds to the needs of our patients and the public, and also responds to the importance of creating value in terms of healthcare. Now, when we start registries, we usually do so taking a specific disease with which we're interested and collecting a set of metrics to analyze the outcome from that particular disease or clinical treatment. But quite clearly, for patients and for the public, it's not just about managing a process or a treatment or a complication. It's about trying to understand how that illness or that problem fits into the overall health landscape and what they've been developing over many years during their lifetime. So instead of trying to focus only on specific registries and bringing them together, healthcare is going to evolve into a program that actually starts with prevention, moves through primary care, secondary care, and clinical outcomes. And one of our major aims in NICOR is to begin to integrate those different elements of the patient's journey for cardiovascular disease into one longitudinal patient journey or data spine. This is something that the NHS in general has been extremely interested in, and we're likely to see this as the central focus for big data in the NHS going forward. By linking the whole patient journey for cardiovascular disease, we can now begin to produce an extraordinarily valuable set of data, because we can now start to think about the way in which other influences can affect that cardiovascular journey and data. We can start to think of how cardiovascular data links to other disease registries and other illnesses, diabetes, renal disease, cancer, for example, and how the data that is being collected from other sources, cohort data, increasing biobank data, and social and prescribing data can be used to enhance the value of our cardiovascular data spine. We've already done very well in beginning this journey. A few years ago, we started to work together between cardiology registries and cancer registries to create an academic program called NICOR, which links these two registries together for two of the most important diseases that the population is at risk from. And this has produced not just an exemplar of how we can bring large-scale data together, but also already produced a number of important insights in peer-reviewed publications. Now, creating a national data spine and data set in the way that we've been discussing has not only huge opportunities, but also some potential threats that are being perceived as loss of control of individuals' data and inappropriate use of those data without permission for individuals. And a key element to the strategy for national data that NICOR needs to participate in is the building of trust that the value of this program is going to be much greater than the potential risks for the individual in terms of loss of control of their data. Risk of data usage and linkage has been greatly emphasized in the press and discussed in the last few years, but we have to convince the public and our patients that there is also a risk of over-regulation and a lost opportunity for the use of their data to help their own health journey. We've been able to show some of these values that patients and the public will benefit from by incorporating their data into these large-scale national registries and linked data spines. This was a publication that showed how important it is to look at long-term impact of treatments such here aortic valve implantation, where we compared the national data for different types of aortic valve over a 15-year period. And astonishingly, this type of work has not been done systematically when treatments are provided and devices in particular are inserted into patients. There's been very little attempt to provide a comprehensive systematic overview of the results of those interventions. So introducing innovation into the healthcare landscape is also a key opportunity for NICOR and national data. We've talked about surveillance of existing treatments such as valve replacement, but any novel treatment ought to go through a process that is independent, has clinical oversight, has academic analysis of the results, and works hand in hand with industry to optimize and develop treatments. And this type of process to introduce innovation, and in particular new technologies into healthcare, is a key step in the new National Health Service landscape. The real-world data that we collect in NICOR has an important role in underpinning that process. Now, traditionally, medical treatments are appraised and evaluated in guidelines, which are largely top-down guidelines, which have brought together information from clinical trials and academic publications to develop best standards of care. Real-world data has not been particularly well represented in these guidelines up to now, but this is changing with an appreciation that some of the data that's being used to develop clinical guidelines is very specific, not necessarily representative to the whole population, and that the real-world data that we contain in organizations like NICOR can have a real role to play. We're working increasingly closely with NICE in the UK, but also internationalizing this with work together with the American College of Cardiology and the European Society of Cardiology to internationalize some of the data we're collecting in real-world registries and to use these data to underpin quality care guidelines. So the R in NICOR represents the potential value of the data we're collecting to support research. Research is essential to drive innovation and improvement in clinical care, and the real-world data in the large registries has a real role to play both in observational research and, as I'm going to show you, in clinical trials. The data spine from primary care through to secondary care and to outcome can potentially underpin extraordinarily large data sets and analyses of common diseases as they occur in the population and evolve over time. Here is a very nice example of that, using the data in NICOR to look at the relationship between blood pressure and clinical complications and demonstrate how there is this continuous relationship between blood pressure levels and some of the cardiovascular complications we'd like to prevent. Making our data research ready for this type of work is an important goal and development that we need to encourage for the collection and use of the national data. At the end of the day, observational data is often hypothesis generating, and real advances in treatment require evaluation in randomized clinical trials. Randomized clinical trials are difficult and costly. They're often rather specialized. They evaluate specific treatments in very tightly defined populations with a limited duration and a limited number of clinical outcomes, and not necessarily applicable to the care of people in the community with a broader range of presentations. The traditional model for doing a clinical trial is expensive and difficult, and the system has actually failed to deliver new treatments in terms of value, in terms of the investment in the process. You can see here, over the last 50 years, the number of new drugs approval related to the R&D expenses for running classical clinical trials, and you can see the cost per molecule that has been developed into clinical practice has risen exponentially. So randomized clinical trials in the traditional way are under threat in terms of their use to develop novel treatments. Embedding those sort of clinical trials in the registries that we have in NICOR is potentially transformational in terms of the approach, in terms of efficiency and value. We cannot separate real-world data and randomized trials, but what we have to do is to bring the randomized clinical trial and embed it into the registry to facilitate and make this work better. We've started to do this in collaboration with Sweden, who have similar national data that we collect in NICOR, and actually very excited to have the first randomized registry-based clinical trial in the UK, the DAPA-MI trial, actually running in the last year. This is a trial of centres in the UK and Sweden looking at the impact of a novel treatment in patients after myocardial infarction And the registry has been used not just for site selection, but also to enhance data submission and outcome analysis in the trial within the two sets of registries. It's a big operation aiming to recruit more than 6,000 patients, and if successful, is an exemplar of a new era in the design of clinical trials to reduce costs, maximize the data that we collect, and the relevance to our clinical practice. So there is a potential for leveraging the national data over and above the successes we've had in quality improvement and quality assurance. In the COVID era, as we've already discussed earlier today, lots of the barriers to doing this type of work were broken down because of the need for rapid access to data to inform national policy. And going forward, we mustn't lose the achievements we made during the COVID pandemic. We've got to maintain the streamlined process, reducing bureaucracy and governance. We've got to create and fund a unified pathway for data collection, analysis, and then dissemination. We've got to make the data ready for the extended use and values that we've been talking about in this presentation. And the cardiovascular specialty must continue to lead in this endeavor. We've been at the front of the queue based on our tradition of collecting and analyzing data together in NICOR, and the profession, our public, and the patients must remain properly engaged in this process. If we do this well, we can fulfill William Osler's wisdom that he said over 100 years ago when he said, it's only by collecting data and using them to the best of their capacity that we get sense in clinical care. And I'd like to think that NICOR will evolve not just from where we are now, but have an increasingly important role in the developing national landscape, which is being built on analysis and use of real-world data to drive improvements in healthcare. Thank you very much.